Ben Shapiro has emerged as one of the top defenders of free speech.
There's speech I don't like, there's speech you don't like, but if we can't agree that there is a difference between speech and violence, we're not going to be able to have a free state, let alone a free country. There's a big part of the left, and it's growing, that says that it is incumbent to protect the campus from ideas that are dissenting, and everyone who dissents must be thrown off.
That's what right-wing propagandist Ben Shapiro once said about free speech. If we can't agree that there's a difference between speech and violence, we're not going to be able to have a free country. But fast forward to today, and Ben Shapiro has changed his tune. And I say this because Mahmoud Khalil, one of the organizers of the anti-genocide protests at Columbia University, was detained by ICE. And his own attorney didn't even know which facility he was taken to. Turns out he was transported across the country to a detention center in Louisiana, and he's now facing deportation even though he is a green card holder because he dared to condemn his university's complicity with Israel's genocide in Gaza. Now, the Trump administration admitted that they're not even charging him with the crime, so he literally faces deportation because he dared to express speech that they didn't like. The First Amendment is supposed to protect people from situations like these. But apparently, we've now crossed the Rubicon, and the Constitution is no longer in effect. We're officially entering authoritarian territory, and Mahmoud Khalil's fate will determine the future of free speech in America. This is a test case, as Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib put it. So this is the free speech issue of our generation. So of course, Ben Shapiro, dubbed the top defender of free speech, or one of the top defenders of free speech at least, by Laura Ingraham, is definitely going to defend Mahmoud's right to free speech, even though he disagrees with him, right? Wrong. In response to Mahmoud's wife complaining about how her husband was effectively kidnapped by the U.S. government, Ben Shapiro responded saying, "No, you see, kidnapping is what Hamas does. You remember, it's the thing Mahmoud Khalil celebrates." Now, first and foremost, Mahmoud Khalil isn't pro-Hamas, he's pro-Palestinian, and doesn't think that the eradication of Gaza's entire population is a proportional punishment for Hamas's attack on October 7th. But even if he was explicitly pro-Hamas, guess what? That is still protected speech under the U.S. Constitution. Ben should know this as one of the top free speech defenders in the country. As Ben put it, if we can't agree that there's a difference between speech and violence, we're not going to be able to have a free country. And since we can't agree on that difference, I guess we're not going to be able to have a free country. And by his own logic, the U.S. would be justified in kidnapping him since Israel, the country that Ben Shapiro supports, has kidnapped approximately 9,000 Palestinian hostages, including hundreds of children. Now, if a Democratic president chose to jail Ben Shapiro and justified it by citing his support for the IDF, which is a terrorist organization, I would condemn that because I actually care about free speech, even if it's speech that I disagree with. And I care about Ben Shapiro's free speech rights, not because I like hearing fascistic genocide apologia, but on principle, and admittedly, out of self-interest. If the government can censor Ben Shapiro, I know that they'll be able to censor me too. So this is why we all should care about free speech. But since Ben Shapiro doesn't actually care about free speech, he's pretending like this isn't actually a free speech issue at all, even though by his own tacit admission, it's clear that this very much is. So on Facebook, he writes, Columbia University student Mahmoud Khalil was the first to be arrested by Homeland Security agents for his participation in pro-Palestinian demonstrations on campus, which, by the way, is not a crime. This is protected speech under the First Amendment, even if you don't like it. He continues, President Trump vowed he would not be the last. The media is trying to spin this as an attack on free speech, but this isn't about protesting. It's about aiding and abetting terrorist sympathizers on American soil. Okay, so that's how Ben Shapiro is trying to justify his bullshit position. He's twisting himself into a pretzel to make it seem like this isn't actually a free speech issue when he knows that it is, hence why he's coming up with this bullshit justification. And to this claim that Mahmoud has provided material support to Hamas, that's just not true. The government has provided zero evidence that this is the case, nor have they charged him with a crime. If he did do that, then they would have already charged him. But since they haven't, that goes to show you that they're simply detaining him because they don't like what he said. And by Ben Shapiro's own logic, he himself is also aiding and abetting terrorists on American soil. He has explicitly expressed support for Benjamin Netanyahu, a modern-day Hitler who's wanted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. He thinks that he should have free speech to support terrorism, but he doesn't think that Mahmoud should have the freedom to condemn Netanyahu's terrorism. See, you get free speech if you want to support a genocide, but you don't get free speech to condemn genocide by Ben Shapiro standards, the supposed top defender of free speech. But he's not a hypocrite, guys, because you see, it's totally not a free speech issue. In fact, everybody who's calling him a hypocrite, they're the real hypocrites, because in a hypothetical scenario that he made up in his head, we would probably be as unprincipled as him.
And we all know, by the way, that if this person had been on campus handing out, as an immigrant, handing out Ku Klux Klan flyers, that person would be deported and there wouldn't be anybody batting an eye. We all know this to be the fact. It is only that there are certain subgroups in the United States, particularly on the left, who are seen as too successful to be determined as quote-unquote minority groups. That's what's going on here. So another win for the Trump administration.
First of all, it wouldn't be illegal because that would also be protected speech. Second of all, you don't get a pass for hypocrisy if you think that your political opponents would be equally inconsistent in your made-up scenario. You are the free speech guy, right? You're the facts don't care about your feelings guy, and yet you've morphed into the SJW that you've destroyed on college campuses. You are openly supporting censorship just because you disagree with the person who's being censored. Just own it. Stop trying to spin it. Just own it and admit that you don't care about free speech. See, this is a test where you can prove to us that you're serious about free speech, but you're failing that test, Ben. But to be fair, he's not the only shameless hypocrite, because so many right-wingers are proudly demonstrating that they don't give a fuck about the First Amendment or even the principle of free speech. See, when they said free speech, what they meant was that they wanted to be able to say slurs and racist things and not get banned from social media platforms and not receive any criticism for saying said slurs. But in their twisted world, if you use your speech to condemn their bigotry and racism or criticize them, see, that is a violation of free speech. That's the start and end of their concern about free speech. Literally. That's it. I'm not being hyperbolic. That is literally all they care about when they say that they care about free speech. But if the government literally abducts a permanent resident for speech that they disagree with, well, that's not actually a free speech issue because, they disagree with him. Makes perfect sense, right? Maybe they'd be more sympathetic towards Mahmoud if he said slurs. That's the only free speech issue that seems to galvanize them. But I want to talk about another free speech warrior who led the charge against censorship, albeit in a video game. I'm of course talking about right-wing slop tuber Asmongold, who was very clear about his feeling about censorship, at least when it comes to breasts in a video game. I'm not making this up. So we're going to watch a clip, and Asmongold is going to be the guy at the bottom on the left reacting and agreeing with a creepy cartoon animation that's complaining about a video game developer censoring the breasts of a video game character by subtly changing her outfits. Just watch and we'll see how passionate he is about free speech in this issue.
Now, many bad actors on Twitter, whether it's regular users, game journalists, or content creators, have been using this opportunity to not only justify but also celebrate these acts of censorship because it fulfills their own agendas.
Of course it
does. So we have a lot of tweets like this saying, if you actually saw a woman in real life, you'd realize that they actually made the outfit more attractive. First off, projection as usual. But here's the thing. Okay. They're trying to say that this is actually better. Adding the black lace here behind the outfit is making it more attractive. First of all, that's your subjective opinion. People will agree with you, some people will disagree. While that is a subjective opinion, here is an objective fact. They advertised this game as something that was uncensored. Why are you intentionally missing the point so much to the point where you're celebrating these changes? These changes that go
because the changes align with their worldview. That's the reason why. Here's the reason why people care. It's because they're having their content changed to appeal to a group of people that are not them. Of course people are going to get mad about this.
But in the replies, someone corrected him and said it's not about sexy outfits, it's about censorship. He says, but complaining about seeing 40% titty instead of 50% titty is some incredibly weirdo shit to complain about. Like, you couldn't waterboard that info out of me.
Well, isn't it some incredibly weirdo shit to change? I mean, like, I think, again, like, any argument that these people make can immediately be reflected on them. Like, 10%'s a lot? It is.
Yeah, I mean, seeing 10% less titty in a video game is the censorship issue of our time, so much so that a petition to show more in-game titty reached almost 100,000 signatures on change.org, and one of the top comments on Asmongold's video encouraged people to sign that petition to, quote, save the titties. And during this time, Asmongold took a very principled position on censorship more broadly, saying that even if he disagreed with a video game journalist calling people like him weird little freaks for even caring this much about this, he didn't think that they should be fired simply for having a different opinion.
I think that everybody should be able to have an opinion, and if you disagree with the opinion, the free marketplace of ideas is the greatest thing that our culture has. And I don't want to see people get fired for having an unpopular opinion. I want to see them defeated in the free marketplace of ideas like they have been.
So as you can see, he was pretty clear, pretty consistent, and credit to him for that stance. Now, this was in reference to the private sector, so the First Amendment doesn't necessarily apply in that instance, but if he was this sensitive to supposed censorship in a video game, one would think that he'd be even more outraged at censorship from the federal government, since that doesn't just violate the principle of free speech he cares so much about, it violates the First Amendment, which outlines the principles he presumably believes that the rest of society should follow. But I'm sure that you know where this is going, because Asmongold weighed in on Mahmoud's unconstitutional detention and potential deportation, and all of a sudden, the free speech principles that he espoused when it came to titties didn't apply to Mahmoud Khalil. In fact, he was stoked about it.
If this person isn't a citizen and you're supporting terrorist groups and you're not a citizen, get the fuck out of the country. Get the fuck out. It is a privilege to be here as a non-citizen. It's not a right. It's a privilege. Get the fuck out. It's that simple. He had a green card? Not anymore. Yeah, I completely support this. Absolutely 100%. This isn't just freedom of speech, right? This is a person coming from another country into our country to agitate unrest in the best interest of a literal terrorist organization and commit crimes, and we're supposed to act like this person shouldn't be immediately fucking deported? I hope they do this to more of them. Supporting a person who's part of a group that is an advocate of terrorism, this is a very, very unpopular position to have.
Oh, okay, well, you said it's unpopular, so I guess that justifies his deportation. Except, isn't that the whole point of free speech? To protect people's right to express themselves even if their opinions are unpopular? I mean, the First Amendment is intended to protect all speech, but especially unpopular speech, because nobody's going to have an issue with popular speech. You're not going to go to jail or be criticized for saying that ice cream is delicious. But what happened to defeating people in the marketplace of ideas, Asmon? Why doesn't that courtesy extend to Khalil? Well, the government says that he supports a terrorist organization, so I guess it must be true. It's not like the government has a reason to lie about this, since they're the ones funding the genocide he's protesting, so might as well believe them. It's just, it's comical. Maybe this unwashed, rat-faced Neanderthal would actually care about Mahmoud's plight if the government detained him for drawing an anime girl that showed a little bit too much skin. Maybe then he'd rally his 3 million subscribers on YouTube to take action and sign a petition or something. It's so pathetic. But we're not done, because Representative Dan Crenshaw also purported to be a big free speech defender himself. In fact, he proudly shared this clip from his appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast to his personal YouTube channel, where he says that even private companies should adhere to the principles of the First Amendment.
I do think you have an American obligation to actually adhere to free speech standards and to adhere to the same standards that the government adheres to, which is your speech is not protected if it incites violence directly. It's a pretty clear standard.
Yes.
Everything else is entirely vague and only leads to a slippery slope.
Yeah, but apparently being against the genocide is a bridge too far. And I say this because, of course, Dan Crenshaw was defending Mahmoud's detention on Piers Morgan, but thankfully Mehdi Hasan was there to explain to him why he's dead wrong.
The White House said to the Free Press, Barry Weiss's right-wing Free Press, this week, we are not accusing him of breaking any laws. In fact, if you want to understand the laws, you need to look at the Immigration National Act of 1952. They're actually taking him into deportation proceedings under Section 237A4CI, which allows Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, to personally deport a migrant because he believes that migrant's presence has serious potential adverse consequences for U.S. foreign policy. That is the obscure act, which, by the way, was designed for Eastern European Jews to get rid of them because they were deemed to be communists in the 1950s. That is what Rubio is using to get rid of a lawful permanent resident. Now, whether that's legal or not, Trump's late sister, Judge Marion Trump Barry, said it was a violation of the First Amendment. We'll see if the Supreme Court gets involved. But the idea that we should live in a country where Marco Rubio or Antony Blinken can remove a green card holder because he doesn't like his views and they're against U.S. foreign policy, some nebulous aim, that's outrageous. And there was a time when the Republican Party would have been against that.
Thank you for making the argument
today,
stronger. You've added to my argument, and I appreciate that. So perhaps you should be defending the Trump administration instead of me.
I'm pointing out to you that he hasn't broken any laws.
He hasn't
committed any criminal violence. He hasn't broken any laws.
He hasn't
broken any laws. That law,
which Rubio is saying.
Dan, let me explain it to you again. That law gives Rubio the power to do it. That doesn't mean Mahmoud Khalil has broken any laws.
And I gave you
Maybe
another
you don't
law,
understand
I referenced another law.
And you're wrong. And you're wrong. The White House disowned you, Dan.
And
the White House disowned you. The White House said we're not accusing him of law breaking. Your White House, Dan. It's embarrassing for you because the White House disowned you, and you don't know that.
You just quoted Rubio referencing a law, did you not?
No, because you don't understand the law.
So what do you mean they're not?
The law gives Rubio, let me say it slowly then. Rubio has the power to remove someone he believes is against U.S. foreign policy.
Yes.
That is not someone who's broken the law. That just gives him immigration power. Nobody is suggesting Mahmoud Khalil has broken the law. He hasn't been charged with breaking any law.
Fine. I understand.
He was disappeared to Louisiana.
I understand what you're saying.
You say he broke the law. The White House says he didn't. So check with the White House on talking points before you come on TV.
I can have my own opinion on the legal justification for removing this person.
They always care so much about free speech until somebody says something that they disagree with. Then that goes out the window. They really are the biggest fucking snowflakes in the country. But of course, we're not done because I want to hear from Alan Dershowitz, which is a sentence that I never thought that I would say. So let me rephrase that. We're going to hear from Alan Dershowitz, a Jeffrey Epstein associate and author of Cancel Culture, the latest attack on free speech and due process, to hear his not so surprising thoughts on Mahmoud's detention.
Whether or not he has a First Amendment right as a green card holder is one thing, but why should anybody support him? When they supported the right of Nazis to speak in Skokie back in 1977, when I was on the board of the National Civil Liberties Union, nobody supported the Nazis. They all said they were despicable, terrible, terrible people, but maybe they have a right to speak. People should say the same thing about Khalil. He's a despicable, horrible person. He should be kept away from his wife and his baby the way he kept Israelis away from supported Hamas killing children, killing babies. He's not somebody who should be admired or supported. And yet too many people have not only supported his right to speak, but supported the despicable content of his speech. So he ought to be treated the way we treat Nazis. We maybe give them the right to free speech, but we certainly despise them, hate them, don't wish them well, and don't express sympathy for them, their wives, or their babies. This is not a man who deserves any sympathy. We may deserve his First Amendment protection so that we can hear him make his despicable statements, but he deserves nothing but the most utter contempt.
You catch all that? In case it was a little difficult to follow along, I think I understand what he's saying. So he's saying that, of course, his First Amendment rights as a permanent resident have been violated, but we shouldn't support him. Although, maybe we should support his right to speak, but on the other hand, he should be kept away from his wife and baby, which implies that we shouldn't support his right to speak. And also, too many people are just supporting his right to free speech, although maybe we should give him the right to free speech because we also deserve the same free speech protections. Makes sense. Ellen, I don't think that you understand this. I've got to add this as well. But in the analogy that you're using, you are the Nazis. You're the bad guys. Netanyahu is Hitler, the IDF is the Gestapo, and the Palestinians are the victims of a Holocaust. Mahmoud is the one opposing the Nazis. You are the one supporting the Nazis in your analogy. But even when he flips reality on its head, you can tell that he knows that this man's rights have absolutely been violated, but he can't admit that even if he's an attorney and knows that that's the case, because he's a hack who doesn't actually give a shit about free speech. But There's more. Ari Fleischer, the White House press secretary under George W. Bush, is a huge defender of free speech, and as a supporter of the invasion of Iraq, you can understand why. That invasion led to a minimum of 1 million Iraqi deaths. Some might even say that that was tantamount to terrorism. So since he vocally supported death and destruction, he knows firsthand how important free speech is. And for his own sake, he wants to make sure that free speech is protected. Even the most unpopular speech is protected, since he himself has espoused speech that is very, very unpopular, to put it mildly. He even accused Facebook of violating the principles of free speech when they were removing posts calling for people to violate social distancing guidelines at the beginning of the pandemic. As for Mahmoud, well, of course, he doesn't support free speech any longer because, well, that's somehow different.
What happened to Mahmoud Khalil had nothing to do with speech. It has everything to do with creating an encampment that is where Zionists are prohibited, where Jewish students are not allowed to walk on their own campus. These are crimes. These are deportable events. These are things that we would never tolerate. As for all these people who are now in Trump Tower, I hope that this administration will do what the Biden administration did to the January 6 people who walked inside the Capitol. They have the technology, get their faces, match it up with the database, and if any of them are non-citizens, every one of them is trespassing. They all should be deported from this country, too.
They are literally incapable of defending their position without lying. Conflating Jewish people with Zionists is itself anti-Semitic. People who aren't Jewish identify as Zionists, like President Biden, who's a Catholic, because Zionism is an ideology, whereas Judaism is an ethnicity and a religion. And some of the protests on college campuses were led by Jewish students. He knows this, but he's leaving that out because he's lying by omission. But after feigning concern for anti-Semitism, what does he do? He calls for the deportation of Jewish protesters in Trump Tower who are bravely demanding that Mahmoud be released. Conservatives don't believe in free speech. But moving on, I could show you an old clip of Fox News host Harris Faulkner talking about how important free speech is, but I don't have to do that before playing this most recent clip of her violating that standard because she contradicts herself in the same thought.
Free Mahmoud, free them all. I'm wondering, Ari, who are they all? And if the world is watching our nation right now and they know us as you know, a bastion of free speech, so on and so forth, when you hate, when people feel under threat because of what you're saying, that's actually not protected speech.
That's right.
And look at some of the signage in here. I mean, they hate Israel. They hate Jewish Americans. They are anti-American.
Their signs say, "Not in our name, fight Nazis, not students, and opposing fascism is a Jewish tradition." Yet, they're very clearly hateful and anti-American, and they probably shouldn't have free speech rights, according to this principled Fox News host. Listen, conservatives do not believe in free speech. And over the course of this video, I've talked about propagandists in new media and old media, politicians, an attorney, a streamer, and across the broad spectrum. You can see that they are all completely full of shit when they say that they support free speech. And trust me, I could do this all day. Here's Dave Rubin supposedly supporting free speech, and here he is opposing it. Here's Marjorie Greene denouncing her ban on Twitter as a violation of her free speech rights, and here she is hoping that charges are pressed against these protesters at Trump Tower. Listen, don't ever let these cretins lecture anyone about free speech ever again. When they say they support free speech, that is a one-way street. They mean free speech exclusively for them and what they think should be protected speech, and none for you. They have no principles. Their goal is to crush us by all means necessary. Hypocrisy is a feature of fascism, not a bug. And don't expect any of these people to feel an ounce of shame when you use their own words against them. They simply don't care. They create new standards for Democrats that they don't apply to themselves. Remember Mitch McConnell's rule that we don't confirm Supreme Court justices in election years, only to then rush through Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation weeks before the 2024 election? Yeah, see, the rules and norms, as well as the Constitution itself, is meant as a restraint for their opposition, not for them, as evidenced by the fact that Trump can apparently unlawfully detain a permanent resident in direct violation of the First Amendment, yet still be championed as a hero of free speech by every dickhead with a podcast. So the next time you hear somebody say that the left is against free speech and the right is for free speech, Make them take the Mahmoud Khalil test. It's one of the most effective bullshit detectors we have ever had in politics. Because if they say that they support free speech, but condone Khalil's arrest, that's proof that they don't actually give a fuck about free speech.
Ideas. In recovery mode, my brain ideas. In recovery mode, my brain ideas.